The insult that froze the room in silence did not come in a whisper, nor was it a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, sharp, and hurled like a weapon meant to wound. Under the hot glare of stage lights, in front of cameras that broadcasted to millions, Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her lips curling into a smirk, and spat the words that would ricochet across America. Go back to India. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The debate hall, moments earlier alive with applause and jeers, was now suffocated by shock. You could hear the faint hum of the lights, the nervous shuffle of a chair, the awkward cough of someone who didn't know where to look. The air thickened, charged with disbelief, as if the entire room had been punched in the chest. Eyes darted. Some widened in horror, others narrowed in complicity. The audience froze between instinct and etiquette, torn between outrage and the uneasy question, did she really just say that? A woman in the third row covered her mouth. A man at the back shook his head slowly, whispering something to his neighbor. Phones rose like periscopes, capturing the moment before it vanished. And there, at the center of it all, sat Kash Patel. His expression was unreadable. No flare of anger, no visible crack in his composure. He blinked once, twice, the insult hanging in the air like smoke, refusing to dissipate. The weight of generations pressed into that silence. Every immigrant who had ever been told they did not belong, every child who had been mocked for their name, every patriot questioned because of their skin. In Leavitt's voice, they heard the echo of a prejudice they knew too well. The cameras zoomed in, searching for Patel's reaction, desperate to capture a flinch, a grimace, a flash of fury. But there was none. Only stillness. Only the quiet before a storm. The insult had been delivered with arrogance, but what followed was not what anyone expected, because Patel's silence was not weakness. It was power. The room leaned forward, tension stretching, waiting for the explosion that never came. But what Kash Patel did next would turn that insult into one of the most unforgettable moments in modern American politics. The debate that night was never supposed to be just another exchange of talking points. It was framed as a generational clash, a stage where the old politics of division collided with a new vision of inclusion. America itself seemed to be on trial. Its identity, its promise, its ability to live up to its founding ideals. That's why the insult landed with such violent force. It wasn't simply a remark aimed at one man. It was a dagger aimed at millions of Americans who share his story. For decades, debates had been loud, messy, sometimes cruel, but rarely did they strip bare the raw nerves of belonging the way Karoline Leavitt's words did. Her command, "Go back to India," wasn't about policy or ideology. It was about place, about home, about who has the right to call themselves American. In that moment, every immigrant family watching, every child of immigrants sitting at home with their parents, heard the echo of a question they had faced before. Do you really belong here? The hall itself felt like a microcosm of the nation. On one side, murmurs of approval slipped through clenched teeth, as if Leavitt had voiced a thought they dared not say aloud. On the other, anger pulsed through the crowd. Anger not just at the insult, but at the reminder of how fragile dignity can be in the face of arrogance. The cameras captured it all. The split-screen reality of America laid bare. This wasn't just a personal attack. It was a line that divided the nation. It exposed how, beneath the surface of policy debates and party platforms, the deeper struggle was about identity. Who gets to define America? Who is deemed worthy of its stage? And who is dismissed as an outsider? Patriotism itself was on trial. For Leavitt, patriotism seemed like a costume. Loud flags, loud words, loud certainty. But for Patel, patriotism was something quieter, something earned in service, something lived through sacrifice. And that contrast was now inescapable. One voice embodied arrogance, the other dignity. One weaponized division, the other carried the weight of belonging. The audience watching at home felt the tension seep through their screens. Social media flared with half-sentences and hashtags, clips already replayed in disbelief. Commentators whispered that this could be the defining moment of the debate, not because of policy, but because of the raw confrontation with prejudice that America had just witnessed. And in that silence, after the insult, as the nation held its breath, the stakes had never been higher. Patel wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was carrying the hopes of millions who had been told to shrink, to hide, to go back. Leavitt had drawn the battle lines, but she had no idea that the line she drew would be the very one that shattered her own composure. The cameras stayed fixed on Patel, waiting, pressing, knowing the story was not finished. Because silence cannot last forever. And what Patel was about to say would transform a cruel insult into a defining stand, one that would echo far beyond that debate stage. Karoline Leavitt did not stumble onto the stage by accident. She had carved her way into politics through sharp elbows and sharper words, cultivating a reputation less for policy brilliance than for her willingness to say the things others only whispered. In an era where media attention is currency, Leavitt understood that outrage could be minted into gold. Every insult, every soundbite, every calculated provocation became another brick in the fortress of her brand. She was young, ambitious, and hungry, qualities that in another form might have inspired admiration. But for Leavitt, ambition often veered into arrogance. She strutted into debates with the smug confidence of someone who believed shock value could substitute for substance. If her opponents spoke of jobs, she would sneer about character. If they spoke of immigration reform, she would roll her eyes and reach for the cheap line that could dominate headlines by morning. Her political weapon was not vision, it was venom. Critics called her dismissive. Supporters called her fearless. Both were right in their own way. Leavitt built her persona on the idea that she was the one unafraid to say it like it is, though more often than not, what she said was designed not to clarify, but to wound. In her world, politics was not a contest of ideas, but a gladiatorial pit where cruelty was mistaken for courage. She thrived in the chaos. Every viral clip of her mocking an opponent, every replay of her smirk after a cutting remark, fueled her momentum. She knew how to play the cameras, how to craft an image of dominance. Even when her facts faltered or her logic cracked, she leaned on volume, confidence, and spectacle to cover the gaps. Her aggression became her armor, her dismissiveness, her shield. But arrogance is a dangerous foundation. It blinds. It convinces you that every jeer is applause, every gasp is admiration, every silence is fear. Leavitt's rise had been swift, but it was also brittle. The more she thrived on spectacle, the more she became addicted to it, escalating her attacks in pursuit of the next viral moment. She wasn't playing for history, she was playing for clicks, and she knew that cruelty was the fastest shortcut to attention. And so, when she faced Patel on that stage, she reached once more for the weapon she trusted most. She didn't need to counter his policy arguments. She didn't need to engage with his record of service or his vision for the country. She needed only a line, a cruel, cutting line, that would put him on the defensive and elevate her into the spotlight. Go back to India. In her mind, it was the perfect strike. Short, sharp, impossible to ignore. It would rattle him, dominate headlines, and send her supporters into cheers of approval. It was, she believed, another notch in her arsenal of viral moments. But villains rarely recognize the limits of their own power. They mistake the thrill of the crowd for the voice of the nation. They confuse arrogance with strength. And Leavitt, in her hunger for attention, failed to see how far she had pushed. She failed to notice that the audience she thought would laugh was instead recoiling, that the silence following her words was not stunned respect, but horrified disbelief. Her aggression had carried her far, but on this night, It carried her over a cliff because for the first time, her dismissiveness was not landing as fearless. It was landing as small. It was not striking Patel, it was exposing her. The very qualities that had built her reputation were about to unravel it. She smiled as the words left her lips, certain she had won the moment. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that history doesn't always reward the loudest voice. Sometimes it crowns the calmest, and her words on this night would backfire in ways she never imagined. Kash Patel's story does not begin on the debate stage. It begins in the hum of a crowded kitchen, in the calloused hands of immigrant parents who traded comfort for the uncertainty of a new land. His mother and father arrived in America with little more than grit and the stubborn belief that their children would grow up in a country where anything was possible. They worked jobs that bent their backs and tested their spirits. His father in a tireless routine of long shifts, his mother juggling work with raising a family. Yet they carried themselves with quiet dignity, never asking for applause, only opportunity. As a boy, Patel saw that sacrifice up close. He saw the worry lines deepen on his parents' faces when bills piled higher than paychecks. He heard the silence at the dinner table when exhaustion drowned out conversation. But he also saw resilience. His parents never once allowed bitterness to eclipse their pride in being American. For them, the American dream wasn't a slogan. It was a duty to be lived day by day, with humility and determination. Patel carried that duty into his own life. He studied harder than most, not because success was guaranteed, but because he knew failure was unaffordable. He pursued law, not as a gateway to prestige, but as a tool to protect others the way his family had once longed to be protected. When doors seemed locked to someone with his last name, he knocked harder. When he was told he didn't belong, he worked until his presence was undeniable. In time, his persistence carved a path into the highest levels of government. Patel became a public servant in the truest sense of the phrase. Someone who saw America not as a prize to be claimed, but as a responsibility to be shouldered. He served in national security, stood beside soldiers, pored over intelligence briefings, and carried the weight of decisions that shaped the safety of millions. His loyalty was not to one faction or one figure, but to the flag itself. The same flag his parents had once looked at with awe, the same flag that draped the coffins of the fallen he had sworn to protect. Yet through it all, Patel never forgot where he came from. He wore his heritage not as a burden, but as a badge, a reminder that America's strength is built not from sameness, but from difference. His story was proof that the American spirit does not belong to one color, one creed, or one origin. It belongs to all who give of themselves for its promise. This is why, when Leavitt sneered, "Go back to India," it struck not only as cruel but absurd. Patel had given more to America than many who draped themselves in patriotism as theater. His service, his sacrifices, his very life had been proof of belonging. To suggest otherwise was to deny not only his worth, but the worth of millions who, like him, had woven their stories into the fabric of the nation. And that is why the insult did not crumble him. It steeled him, because he knew his story was not hers to erase. His American identity was not fragile. It had been tested and proven, baptized in sacrifice and service. Where others sought cheap applause, Patel carried the weight of lived truth. The boy who once watched his parents labor through long nights had grown into the man who now stood on the stage, unshaken, the embodiment of everything they had dreamed for him. The man who once fought to belong now carried himself as though belonging was never in question. And the millions watching saw in him not just one man, but their own reflection, their parents, their struggles, their pride. In Patel's calm, they recognized their own strength. In his silence, they recognized their own dignity. In his story, they recognized America's promise. And it was this very journey, this unshakable identity, that gave him the strength to deliver the response of a lifetime. The words still hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, Go back to India." For a moment, the hall was suspended in silence. Every breath caught, every heartbeat slowed. Then the reaction began to ripple through the room. Murmurs first, shocked whispers, incredulous gasps, the kind of low rumble that rolls through a crowd when something unthinkable has just been said. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, others exchanged uneasy glances, and still others pulled out their phones, fingers already racing to tweet what they had just witnessed. Leavitt, however, mistook the silence as triumph. She leaned back in her chair with a self-satisfied smirk, as though she had struck the decisive blow. And when the whispers turned to audible outrage, she doubled down. "If you don't like it here," she snapped, her voice rising above the noise, "then maybe you should find another country that appreciates you. This is America. Love it or leave it." The dismissiveness in her tone cut deeper than the words themselves. It was the arrogance of someone who believed patriotism could be owned, who believed identity could be revoked with a sneer. Her eyes swept the crowd, daring anyone to challenge her, reveling in the chaos she had unleashed. But at the center of the storm, Patel sat unmoved. His posture remained steady, his expression composed. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lash out, didn't give her the eruption she seemed to crave. Instead, he let the silence do its work. The longer he remained quiet, the more powerful it became. The weight of the insult shifted from him back onto her, magnified by her own bluster. The audience noticed. The murmurs grew louder, angrier, not at Patel's stillness, but at Leavitt's cruelty. One man in the second row shook his head violently, muttering, "Unbelievable." A woman near the front crossed her arms, glaring at Leavitt with disgust. Even among her own supporters, the unease was visible. Some leaned back uncomfortably, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Patel glanced briefly toward the crowd, his eyes calm but piercing, as if to acknowledge the storm without letting it consume him. That glance alone seemed to steady the room. It was a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, measured, deliberate, letting arrogance burn itself out. Leavitt, sensing her control slipping, pressed harder. "See?" she said mockingly, turning her silence into a weapon of her own. "He's got nothing to say. He knows I'm right." Her words were met with scattered boos now, the crowd shifting against her. The smug grin faltered, just for a second, but she recovered, pretending not to notice the tide turning. Everyone leaned in, waiting to see if Patel would explode or rise above. The cameras zoomed closer, the room tightening, history holding its breath. And in that moment, Patel finally moved. Patel finally leaned toward the microphone, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he were letting every second stretch long enough for the nation to lean closer. His eyes fixed on Leavitt, but his voice, when it came, was not for her. It was for the room, for the cameras, for every household watching, calm, even, unshaken. "You tell me to go back," he began, his tone measured, almost conversational. "But where exactly should I go? Should I go back to the hospital where I was born? Should I go back to the schools where I studied the Constitution line by line? Or should I go back to the halls of government where I've served this country, your country, our country, for decades?" The crowd stirred, a murmur of approval rising, the first crack of light breaking through the darkness Leavitt had cast. Patel paused, letting the words sink in, then leaned in again. "You see, I've already gone back. I've gone back to every American community that asked me to listen. I've gone back to veterans who asked me to fight for them. I've gone back to families who wanted someone to defend their future. And every time, I didn't ask them where their ancestors came from. I asked them how I could serve." A wave of applause swept the hall, swelling louder, sharper, until the claps drowned out the remaining murmurs. Cameras caught Patel's face, calm but resolute, and then swung to Leavitt, her smirk faltering, her lips pressed tightly as though she had swallowed the words she wished she could take back. Patel raised a hand gently, quieting the room. His voice dropped to a softer register, forcing everyone to lean in again. "When you tell me to go back, What you're really saying is that service isn't enough. That sacrifice isn't enough. That love of country isn't enough unless it looks like you, speaks like you, believes like you. But America doesn't belong to the loudest voice or the cruelest insult. America belongs to those who give to it. The contrast hit like a hammer. Arrogance against dignity, division against service. The hall erupted, some rising to their feet, others pounding the armrests of their chairs as cheers surged. Patel waited, letting the energy crest before speaking again. "My parents came here with nothing," he continued. "They scrubbed floors, they worked long shifts. They believed in a dream so fragile it could shatter with one missed paycheck. And yet, through all of that, they never doubted that this country was worth it. They never doubted that if you gave America your best, America would give you a place." He paused, and his voice hardened just slightly, his gaze returning to Leavitt. "That is the difference between us. You treat patriotism as a slogan. I treat it as a sacrifice. You wave a flag. My family bled for it." The hall erupted again, this time with a roar so loud the moderators struggled to regain order. The camera caught Leavitt blinking rapidly, her jaw tightening as she scribbled something on her notes, though her hand trembled slightly. The woman who had seemed untouchable just moments before was suddenly cornered, her power slipping through her fingers. Patel pressed on, steady, relentless. "You want me to go back? I will go back, again and again, to the Constitution that guarantees my place here. I will go back to the communities that raised me. I will go back to the ideals that made this country worth defending. And I will go back to the truth, that no insult, no arrogance, no dismissal will erase who I am or what I have given to this nation." The repetition struck like drum beats, each phrase building the rhythm, the crowd swaying with his cadence. The audience clapped in unison now, a rhythm of solidarity echoing through the hall. Even those who had come skeptical, even those who disagreed with him politically, could not ignore the dignity radiating from his words. Leavitt tried to interject, her voice sharp. "This isn't about..." But she was drowned out by the ovation. The moderators attempted to regain control, but the applause rolled on like thunder, refusing to be silenced. Patel remained composed, hands folded in front of him, waiting until the noise finally receded. And then he delivered the line that would be replayed endlessly in clips, quoted in articles etched into memory. "I am not going back because I never left. I am America, and no one gets to tell me otherwise." The eruption was instant and overwhelming. People leapt from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even wiping away tears. It was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. The insult that had once silenced the hall now became the catalyst for its loudest ovation. Leavitt sat stiff, her face flushed, searching for words that would not come. Every attempt to recover fell flat under the weight of Patel's composure. Her power, once fueled by provocation, had dissolved into visible weakness. She shuffled her notes, forced a smile, but the image of her rattled silence stood in stark contrast to Patel's commanding calm. The cameras knew where the story was. They lingered on Patel, capturing the quiet confidence of a man who had not just defended himself, but embodied something larger. In that moment, he was no longer simply a candidate, no longer simply the son of immigrants. He was the vessel of a truth too powerful to deny. The crowd's energy refused to die down. Chants began to rise, "USA, USA." Ironically, the same chant often co-opted by those who claimed exclusivity now rang as an anthem of inclusion, a declaration that Patel's story was as American as any other. Leavitt lowered her gaze. She had wanted a soundbite, a clip, a viral spark. What she had created instead was her own undoing, and Patel, steady as ever, leaned back from the microphone, his work done. The silence he left in his wake was louder than her insult had ever been. The insult meant to diminish him instead became the spark that elevated him into history. The debate hall had barely emptied before the first clips hit the internet. Within minutes, Patel's calm, unshakable words were clipped. captioned, and shared across every platform. The phrase, "I am not going back because I never left. I am America," flashed across timelines like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Washed, "I am America," that stand with Patel. No going back. By dawn, his response wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. Memes filled the feeds, some sharp with humor, others soaked in pride. A side-by-side photo of Leavitt's sneer against Patel's quiet composure was captioned, "Arrogance versus America." Another, showing Patel's hand raised to silence the crowd, carried the words, "Respect speaks louder than hate." The internet, that chaotic, uncontrollable force, had chosen its hero. And it wasn't the candidate who had thrown the insult. News outlets scrambled to catch up. The morning shows opened with the clip on repeat, anchors shaking their heads in disbelief at Leavitt's words, then marveling at Patel's restraint. Cable commentators, normally split down partisan lines, found themselves in rare overlap. Some on the right called Patel's response a masterclass in composure, while voices on the left framed it as a cultural moment that reminded America what dignity looks like. Of course, not everyone agreed. A few voices insisted Leavitt had simply been provocative, or that Patel had played the victim. But those takes were drowned out by the tidal wave of admiration. On talk radio, callers, immigrant fathers, military veterans, school teachers, lined up to share how Patel's words echoed their own experiences of being told they didn't belong. The response wasn't confined to politics. It was deeply personal. Politicians weighed in quickly. Senators, governors, even a few former presidents tweeted their support, praising Patel for defending America's promise with grace. Celebrities followed suit. Actors, athletes, and musicians sharing the clip with captions like, "This is the America I believe in." But perhaps the most powerful reactions came from ordinary people. A video of a young Indian American boy went viral. Standing in front of his school, holding a small flag, he repeated Patel's line with his chest puffed out, "I am America." His classmates clapped. Another clip showed a black veteran with tears in his eyes, saying, "When he said those words, I felt seen." A Latina nurse posted a message late after her night shift. "For years, patients told me to go back. Tonight, I finally heard someone answer for all of us." It wasn't just applause. It was release. It was years of swallowed anger, of quiet endurance, suddenly validated in one unforgettable exchange. Meanwhile, Leavitt found herself engulfed by a storm of criticism. Her supporters tried to rally, but the tide of memes, headlines, and testimonials painted her less as a fighter and more as a symbol of cruelty backfiring. Even allies distanced themselves, their statements tepid, their silence louder than any defense. The polls the next morning reflected the shockwave. Patel's numbers surged, not just among immigrant communities, but across younger generations and independents. Commentators pointed out that in a single night, a narrative had shifted. America wasn't only divided by left and right, it was divided by those who weaponized exclusion and those who embraced belonging. Across campuses, Patel's words appeared on handmade posters and chalk drawings. In union halls, workers invoked his speech as a reminder of shared struggle. Parents tucked their kids in at night and repeated his line, embedding it as a shield against the insults they feared their children might face. What had begun as a debate insult had become something larger, a litmus test for what kind of country America wanted to be. Was it a nation of narrow ownership, where belonging could be revoked with a sneer? Or was it, as Patel embodied, a place where identity was not a disqualifier, but a testament to resilience? The viral moment refused to die down. Patel himself remained measured, thanking supporters but refusing to gloat. "This isn't about me," he told one interviewer. "This is about what kind of America we want to live in, one where no one has to prove their place twice." That humility only fueled the momentum further. By the week's end, It was clear. The clip was no longer just a debate highlight. It had entered the cultural bloodstream, referenced in sermons, classrooms, and late-night monologues. Even critics admitted it was a turning point, a moment that would define how campaigns were remembered. But beyond the viral clips, something far deeper was shifting in America's conscience. The hall was still buzzing, echoes of Patel's words rippling through every corner. Yet as the moderators tried to steer the debate forward, no one could shake the moment that had just unfolded. The insult, meant to cut him down, had instead lifted the room into something larger than politics. And now, Patel leaned into that energy, not with vengeance, but with vision. He spoke not as a man defending himself, but as a voice reminding America of itself. This country, he said, steady and measured, was never promised to one kind of people. It was built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, by immigrants, by dreamers, by men and women who believed in something bigger than themselves. My family came here with little more than hope, and we gave everything to honor that hope. That's not foreign. That's American. Every word landed like a drumbeat. He was no longer debating a rival. He was reframing the stage into a mirror for the nation. His calm dignity stood in stark contrast to the arrogance that had tried to shame him. The more Patel spoke, the clearer the lesson became. Service outlasts ancestry. Character outshines cruelty, and dignity is the only true power that endures. The cameras zoomed in on the audience, faces wet with tears, strangers nodding together, even some of Leavitt's supporters shifting uneasily in their seats. The applause began in cautious waves, then grew, rolling into thunderous rhythm. It wasn't the sound of partisanship. It was the sound of a country remembering its better self. And then, in cinematic stillness, Patel closed his remarks with a line that silenced the hall before it roared again. America does not tell its children to go back. America tells its children to go forward and to bring this nation with them. For a moment, the room stood suspended between silence and eruption. Then came the standing ovation, stretching beyond etiquette, beyond obligation. People clapped not just for Patel, but for what they wished to believe about their country. As he stepped away from the podium, the applause still echoing, cameras caught him walking off stage with his head high, his stride calm. It was not the walk of someone who had won a debate point. It was the walk of someone who had reminded America of its soul. And in living rooms across the nation, viewers felt a swell in their chest. They weren't just watching politics. They were watching a reminder that dignity beats hate, service beats ancestry, and America belongs to everyone who believes in its ideals. It was the emotional crescendo of the night, a moment destined not only for headlines, but for history, books. The debate began with an insult that froze the room in silence. It ended with a response that will be remembered for years to come. What was meant as a cruel dismissal, go back to India, was transformed into a defining moment of strength, pride, and American identity. Kash Patel didn't just answer an attack. He reminded the nation what it means to belong. This wasn't just about Patel. It was about what America stands for. It was about every child who has been told they don't fit in, every family who has worked tirelessly to build a future here, every patriot whose love for this country runs deeper than bloodlines. In one calm, powerful moment, dignity spoke louder than hate. And that's why this story matters. Because politics is more than polls and sound bites. It's about the values we choose to elevate. Do we cheer for arrogance and division, or do we rise with those who carry themselves with dignity, service, and truth? Patel's words gave us that choice, and the reaction of millions showed exactly where the heart of America still lies. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of dignity over hate, share this video, subscribe, and join a community that refuses to stay silent when arrogance tries to rule the stage. Together, we can keep these moments alive, amplifying them until they become more than just viral clips. They become the standard for what we demand in our leaders. Because in the end, history teaches us one truth: when arrogance meets dignity, dignity always wins.